Hello everyone, my name's Ellen, and in celebration of March 2021's Women's History Month, I'll be looking and studying 4 influential female figures across the world. As a third part of this journey, I will evaluate the importance of Emmeline Pankhurst and discuss why she is considered a significant female historical figure. To set out a little background, she was born Emmeline Golden on the 14th of July 1858 into a family with a long tradition of radical politics. Aged 21, she married Richard Pankhurst, a lawyer who supported the women's suffrage movement. Richard was the author of the Married Women's Property Acts of 1870 and 1882, which gave women the legal right to keep earnings and property acquired before and after marriage. As her husband was supportive of the women's suffrage movement, she actively got involved and became a significant figure for the movement in the United Kingdom. In 1889, she founded the Women's Franchise League, which fought for married women to be able to vote in local elections. In October 1903, she helped found the Women's Social Political Union, otherwise known as the WSPU, a political group that became notorious for its activities and demonstrations, and whose members became known as the suffragettes. Her daughters later became actively involved in the movement as well. British politicians, press and the public were astonished by their demonstrations, including window smashing, hunger strike and arson, which was deliberately setting fire to properties. And in 1913, suffragette Emily Davidson was killed when she threw herself under the King's horse at the Derby, as a protest at the government's continued failure to grant women the right to vote. Like many suffragettes, Emmeline was arrested on numerous occasions over the next few years and went on hunger strike herself, resulting in violent force feeding. In 1913, in response to the wave of hunger strikes, the government passed what became known as the Cat and Mouse Act. Hunger striking prisoners were released until they grew strong again and then rearrested. This period of militancy was ended abruptly on the outbreak of the war in 1914. When Emmeline turned her energies to support the war effort. In 1918, the Representation of the People Act gave voting rights to women over 30. Emmeline died on the 14th of June 1928, and shortly after, women were granted equal voting rights with men. So why is Emmeline Pankhurst significant? The aim of the WSPU, or Women's Social and Political Union, was to gain equal rights for women. Emmeline made speeches to encourage women to take action to secure their right to vote. For example, on the 11th of October 1908, they held a large rally in Trafalgar Square to organise a rush on Parliament on the 13th of October, leading to the attempt of 60,000 people to break into Parliament. The rush was unsuccessful, but the amount of support to the movement was clear as a result of Emmeline and fellow WSPU members' speeches. Christabel Pankhurst, Emmeline's daughter, was a trained solicitor, although she was not allowed to practice as she was a woman, acted as their defence when they got called to a trial at Bow Street Court, causing a sensation as she called 2 cabinet members as witnesses. Although they were all found guilty, it was a success, as the whole event caused a mass amount of publicity for the campaign. The WSPU was considered a radical party because of the extreme efforts they used to get their campaign heard. As some methods were violent, they were labelled suffragettes, many members being arrested for their actions and treated poorly within, which also increased public support for the campaign. In 1914, at the outbreak of the war, Emmeline encouraged WSPU members to put their demonstrations on hold to focus supporting the war effort, asking women to take up roles in factories to support the effort. In response, the government released all WSPU members from prison. At the end of the war in 1918, the Representation of the People Act was introduced, which gave women over the age of 30 who owned property the right to vote. Emmeline lived to see some women gain the right to vote. She died just before seeing the law allowing for all women over the age of 21 the right to vote. What were the immediate effects of Emmeline Pankhurst? Emmeline recognised that women were treated differently in comparison to men at an early age, and became motivated to help change that in the social and political spheres in Britain. Her establishment of the Women's Social and Political Union in 1903 encouraged women to fight for their right to vote. Emmeline believed in deeds, not words, meaning that she recognised that simply discussing the inequality would not get women's voices heard in comparison to actions, so that people would be forced to listen to them. For example, the rush on Parliament increased public awareness and support for the women's suffrage movement. Her dedication to the women's suffrage movement is clear, as she was arrested and trialled on a number of occasions due to her actions, which in turn increased public support for the women's right to vote. Her hunger strikes among other members of the WSPU raised public awareness for the inequality between men and women socially and politically. Emmeline led the way for British women to gain the right to vote, and also encouraged other women in other countries to do the same on her speech tours abroad, such as in North America. Emmeline therefore became a symbol of the women's suffrage movement and actively encouraged women to fight for the vote, which was successful as they gained the vote in 1928 under the Equal Franchise Act of 1928. A few months after Emmeline Pankhurst's death. What were the long-term effects of Emmeline Pankhurst? Emmeline Pankhurst became a symbol of the women's suffrage movement in Britain, as she encouraged women to take action to get what they wanted, i.e. the vote and equality with men. She also encouraged women abroad to take action to get what they wanted too, for example in her speech tours in America. Emmeline believed in deeds, not words, showing that she recognised that peaceful acts to get women the vote weren't working, and acting to get their right to vote was much more effective means to get their voices heard. For example, her speeches in Trafalgar Square got much more press coverage than any other movement. The establishment of the WSPU allowed women to express their thoughts on social and political matters, working collectively to reach a common goal. In her lifetime, she succeeded to get some women the right to vote, but she passed away just a few weeks before the act that gave women aged 21 equal voting rights as men, which was the Representation of the People Act of 1928. Her dedication to the 40-year-long cause and her encouraging and inspirational speeches allowed women to get what they wanted and built a path for women in the future to continue fighting for equality. So, to conclude, Emmeline Pankhurst became a significant, influential and inspirational woman to the women's suffrage movement. At an early age, she recognised that women were treated differently to men and was passionate enough to become a part of the movement that would reform society. She founded a number of movements that would go to shape the future for women, but most significantly the WSPU in 1903. The WSPU was considered a radical party at the time because of the extreme measures they went to so they could be heard. For example, Emily Davidson throwing herself under a horse, window smashing, public speeches and demonstrations, with members being labelled suffragettes. Like many other suffragettes, Emmeline was arrested on a number of occasions, but continued to show support and continued to be actively involved in the women's suffrage movement. It is now known that she often went out in disguise to make it harder on the police to identify her, so she could continue to attend public meetings and support and encourage women to become active in the movement. She went on hunger strike herself in protest to the government's continuous failure to grant women's voting rights, resulting in violent force feeding. She underwent cruel, harsh conditions in order to present that women were treated unfairly, bringing media attention and public awareness to the cause. She can therefore be considered a significant figure in women's history, as she shaped modern society and inspires women to close the gap between inequality between men and women today.